Hi, I'm Chris Hartley. I'm going to be continuing the discussion about tamper-evident networks by talking about the evidence of an attack that you can see and how it relates to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So our first agenda that you may have seen on the abstract for this talk got modified a little bit. It's 2020, you're going to have to deal with it. So what we're actually going to do is that we're going to learn how our existing defenses can inform future defenses, watch the red team attack the environment, see how our defenses hold up, learn the basics of how to look for bad things in your environment, and then discover how enterprise security can help test your environment, your visibility, and your readiness to respond. Before I get into that, I want to share a story back in 2015 about when the PLA attacked my.osu.edu. Don't stop me if you've heard this story, I'm telling it anyway. So we noticed an IP address that was persistently attacking my.osu.edu. It was clearly trying to reset a password, we know, because it was hitting all the URLs for forgot password, reset password, and it was really persistent. It was spending about 8 hours a day during the daytime for EST. I'm not sure why they bothered to kind of make it seem as though they were maybe an American while using an IP address associated with the PLA. So we were basically watching for this. We had the automation system. We set up an event policy to detect a successful password reset from this IP address. That eventually happened. It was very helpful that they didn't ever change their IP address. So our automated response when a user password was reset from this IP address was able to black hole the remote system, black hole my.osu.edu. We took it down, paged the incident response team via SMS, and of course, we recovered the account that had been compromised by this attack. And I just wanted to point out that you don't always get this lucky. This IP address is actually listed in who is as a Chinese People's Liberation Army IP address. Why they would bother attacking from this IP address is just beyond me. But it was very helpful. We were able to work with the IDM development team. I'll call it to Matt Black. Essentially what happened is in a certain pattern of page transitions, a session wasn't being cleared, and so the application was led to believe that a user was authenticated when in fact they were not. This enabled the attacker to reset the password. We detected it. That gave us about 240 hours of free nation-state level penetration testing, which would have been very expensive otherwise. This really is a great story if you're talking about the benefit of knowing your attacker. We knew who our attacker was because they didn't change their IP address. We knew what they wanted because they made it very obvious. So in looking at attack, depending on what your goal is, you're going to want to pick a strategy. Attack is, first a codex, a way of talking about TTPs that we all have in common. There are these seminal arguments about what's malware, what's a virus versus a Trojan, what's a rat. None of that is really all that helpful. But it is helpful to have a single way of talking about all things security, which is kind of what attack endeavors to do. So, I would argue that disrupting the attack early, so on the left side of the matrix, is probably a good idea. I've highlighted some of the ones that are easiest to detect and that have happened to us. One that I marked there, trusted relationship. We have issues with this. In fact, I would say that trust relationships are probably our largest risk area, or third-party risk. We can't automate that, unfortunately, but we do need to be aware of it. That will not cover everything, though. What if you already have somebody in your environment? Lateral movement and discovery ought to be fairly easy to detect in many cases, especially if we're talking about just simple scanning. And most attacks will start that way. This is a visualization. It's old. It's from 2003, but demonstrates what a port scanning looks like. It's a visualization of that traffic. So you'll see as we zoom in here, that green line is a lot of port scanning happening all at once. So if we can see it with our eyes, can we see it with our systems? Yes, we can. So we're using border NetFlow here to do that. And we have an event policy. This is T1046. It's that technique inside initial access. We are here just looking for any IP address that has communicated with 9,000 OSU IP addresses. That is highly unusual. It's possible that a legitimate actor might do that, but we've never had a legit complaint about this. So just so you know, if you send 9,000 packets, or I'm sorry, packets at 9,000 hosts to at OSU in 1 minute, you will be blocked. I believe that block is for 30 minutes. And this search, I want to point out, is a Splunk search. So this is valid SPL. I've obfuscated a few things here, but these are things that you can do yourself with your own logs. And there's a link at the bottom of this slide here to a Splunk cheat sheet that is really helpful. I would encourage you to educate yourself on commands like chart, time chart, stats, and there's plenty more. You can actually turn your searches into alerts so that you can receive an email. If you're certain that it's bad behavior, you can talk with us, and if we agree, then we'll say, yeah, if we see that pattern of behavior, then we'll block that host for you. So what does this look like to us? Well, this policy really it gets used a lot. In the last 30 days, our peak was 95 blocks in 1 hour. Also interesting, but I'm not going to go into it really. The valleys in these graphs tend to be around 1 to noon our time. Maybe that's the attacker or stand-up meeting. I have no idea why that happens. Brute forcing is the same thing. The search will look similar. Instead of looking at the number of ports or IPs that a host is talking to, we're looking at the login failures, essentially. So on the right, we have an example of a tool doing a brute force attack. That's what it looks like to the attacker. Then we have an event policy here that will detect that traffic. So we have multiple of these. In this case, we're looking for any host attempting an SSH login according to Suricata. That's the new snort. So this is on the wire, more than 20 times in 5 minutes. That's also a valid Splunk query. So these are things that you can do with your logs as well. So this is what this looks like. We're blocking hosts for this all the time. They're mostly external hosts. Occasionally, we block an OSU host because it's compromised and it's being used to attack people. But occasionally, we just have a host doing its expected behavior and it goes over a threshold and we block them. So this happened on the 12th. I apologize to the unit that had to deal with that. We added them to the allowed list. So this was a partial oops because we probably shouldn't have blocked that IP, but it was engaging the behavior that we were trying to prevent. So it did what it was supposed to do. Another is web scraping. Looking for a vulnerability in a web interface. The first thing you want to know is what all the endpoints are. So this is a very common thing. We see this all the time. So you just guess at a bunch of words and you're effectively brute forcing the web server to see what kind of content it has and then learning about the site from the data that comes back. Can we detect that? Yeah, I think so. I think a good way of doing that is looking at the ratio of success to errors and the total number of requests. So in this case, we have said if a host accesses a web server 200 times and the error rate is over 20%, then we're going to block that host. There could be a flaw in this logic that if a web server were having issues, we might end up blocking their clients. You can't see in the search here, but this is actually limited. This is not for the entire university. This was catered, but I didn't want to spill the beans on who that was. And I'm not going to show how frequent that is. I want to move on to scanning inside the data center. This is lateral movement. So it's actually initial access scanning. Typically, if somebody is in your network and they're engaging in the same behavior, we now call this lateral movement. As I mentioned earlier, we may not simply want to detect initial access. We might want to take into account the possibility of somebody already being in our environment. So here we're looking at lateral movement. And I wanted to draw your attention to somebody scanning inside a data center. Are there legitimate reasons for that? Yes. Vulnerability scanners, system discovery tools, absolutely. You might see this, but you can put those on an allow list. Anything that you don't expect to be scanning inside your data center is probably a cause for some concern. So we can detect that easily as well. This is where we're looking at data center firewalls, and we're simply looking for any host that is blocked more than 2,000 times in a minute. That's a very high threshold, and there's no reason to cross it. At the same time, we don't want to simply block every host that engages in this behavior because we could end up taking down the entire data center. So this needs to be something that's reviewed. So here we use notify ops. This will send a notification to the intrusion detection and incident response team. They will look into it. So when we talk about purple teaming, it's kind of a blend between red and blue. And particularly now that we have attack, we have a way, a shared nomenclature, a way of discussing these things that doesn't cause confusion. We can look at our defenses and say, how well are we prepared against these kinds of TTPs? We can look at our attacks and say, how well are we able to simulate or indeed perform to exploit these issues? Can we pull off this attack? Can we detect it? So I've just got, this is for levity here. This is showing how well coordinated we've been in the past with our red and blue team activities, where we went through a period where we were kind of frequently blocking the penetration test team when they were just doing their jobs. So now we're going to do a simulation. An attacker is going to run through these attacks and look at how our actual defenses will hold up against them. We took some liberties here. We had intended to set up an instrumented environment where we could pull off these attacks, generate real logs, show what they look like and how we would respond to it. That ended up being a little bit more than we were able to do in the time that we had. Plus, it's 2020. Deal with it. So with that, we're over to APT Bob, who will show how our systems hold up to these attacks.
So first thing, Ohio State has come to the attention of some hackers, and an invitation has gone out to scan some of us and find out a little bit more what we have going on here. We'll start out with a tool called Mass Scan. We're going to scan 1,024 ports on 64,000 hosts in under 3 minutes. So it's just flying by. A lot of traffic. As Chris had told you, some of these things generate a lot of traffic in a very short period of time. But from an attacker standpoint, so many people aren't watching that they can get away with this. So we're sending tons of traffic, and we're going to find the needle in the haystack, that one host that is running in this whole 64,000 IP address space. All right, so I got a host on port 80. So obviously got a TCP here, a web server, and maybe we'll find another host, or maybe we'll just find other ports on this host. But I'm going to look once this is done. Yep, same host, another port. I'm going to look and see what is actually running on that host. So I'm going to actually cancel out so you don't have to wait for us to see if we can find anything else here, and do an Nmap scan. And again, I'm going to be sort of the noisy attacker and do the Nmap with the options that bring back just everything that it can, and that is 3.19.18.121. And now this will go a lot faster. It's just targeting one host, and gives us a lot of information about that host. Okay, so we got a web server, we got SSH, RPC, SQL. Great. So let's website and see what it looks like. So what was that? 3.19.18.121. Oh, okay. So we've got the visits, campus visits website. This isn't the real campus visit website. I'm not actually actively attacking. But okay, so this is the site. We found it. We want to see what more there is, and this is another of those forms of scanning that you can do if you're attacking a site. And it is going to brute force, try all the different directories it can think of, and see if we can come up with it with anything interesting. Oh, there's a config directory that could be interesting. Docs, sure, that could be interesting. Let me see. Anything good in here? Index.html, sure, that's going to happen. Okay. All right. Looks like I got blocked by IP address. Of course, you're not blocking all visitors to that site. So there. Now I'm coming in from a different IP address, and I'm just going to resume my attack. You know, I did see some good directories out there, like there's a config directory. So let's see what I find there, because I'm guessing nobody planned to have their config directory actually presented to the internet. And what do you know? I've got the PHP file, which, of course, if I look at that, it's actually going to interpret it as PHP. But what other sensitive stuff was in there? There's a backup. The backup is not going to be interpreted as PHP, so let's look at that. And a server. Okay. All right. So I have a username and a password. We'll see what that can get us and where that goes to. Oh, PHP my admin. All right. Let's see. It's not the greatest thing to have exposed to the public internet. All right, let's try that password, or that username and password here. And no dice. Let's try I think root with the default, but with no password is the default, but nope. Okay. All right. Back to the old drawing board. We've got a username and password. Let's just see if what else was open on there. We had an SSH server on there. Let's see if we can log into SSH. I'm going to cancel out of that. It was DB user. This looks like a fancy password, but it's actually in all the password databases, and it's pretty easy once you figure out what it's all about. All right, so password reuse. Gotta love that. So now I was able to get in because I found something that was really supposed to be part of the web config. And I'll poke around here, but really I'm interested in what I can do with the rest of the network. So I am going to set up to proxy my scanning traffic through this compromised host without actually installing any attack tools on the compromised host. So all of the compromised host is running is SSH. All right. All right. So I've got a SOCKS proxy running on port 31337. All right. This would be so much harder if they had used certificate-based authentication and not a username and password. Okay, so now I have a proxy set up via SSH through that that server, and now I am going to do proxy chains. Is 172.30.30.0/24. And so now what it's doing is sending all of my attack traffic into your data center by way of one compromised SSH account on a public-facing server. And this is pretty much how these attacks work. At this point, hopefully you're finding me, and then some of these timeouts that I'm seeing aren't because there's not a host on that address, but really because the attack is being detected and you're shutting me down. All right, so let's take a look at this. what exactly just happened here? Well, we can actually classify all these attacks using the MITRE attack framework. So first thing we did was remote system discovery. We used mass scan for that. Then we did network service scanning to find out what was on each of the hosts that we found. We only found one host, but we could do that for multiple hosts. It's slower, but it gives you a lot more detail. And then we found some unsecured credentials. That may not be how an attacker gets in, but if you have any sitting out there, you saw how easy it was to brute force discover files and other things like that. We gained our initial access, and then we started lateral movement by setting up to proxy through the compromised device. And you can do these things too, because we actually have a set of tools for you and training to use those tools, and that's called Arsenal. So what is Arsenal? Arsenal is a cloud-based platform that you can use to scan and attack your own systems and see exactly what you are actually vulnerable to. And it's a curated collection of tools that you can use for your own scanning. What it is not is a huge mega collection of security tools that nobody understands what most of them do, and who knows, but we're never going to use all of them. This is stuff that we've built and can add to based on the functionality that we actually need. And it's not this huge collection of attack tools just sitting in your environment waiting for somebody to exploit it.
All right, so APT Bob has had its way with our systems. We blocked him a few times, but he proceeded. So whereas a lot of attackers might be deterred by a target system that's irritating, he moved on. Generally speaking, though, we know that being irritating is effective. We have data to show this, and I wish that I had the graph available. But anytime that we've had an outage with our automation system or with Splunk, there's a graph. It's up and down all the time, but there, you can kind of see the mean might be around here. We have an outage, our response drops to 0. Then sometime later when it returns immediately to a level about twice the previous mean, and then it comes back down. So we know that attackers get irritated and some of them just go away because we're blocking their earlier attempts. In this case, Bob was able to get into the data center, and he started just trying to do some reconnaissance inside the data center, probably thinking, if I was able to get this far, their defenses aren't very good. Fortunately, we had something ready for him. We were looking, you may remember from an earlier slide, for a host inside OSU that's been blocked by a data center firewall more than 2,000 times in 1 minute. In this case, we're saying he was blocked over 13,000 times, and he was scanning port 445. So that's like the Windows port. So this report goes to the intrusion detection and incident response team. Incidentally, when I staged this, I forgot that these notifications are CC'd to the security team. And so they received an alert saying that this IP address, note that that IP address is illegal. You cannot have a 256 in any octet. So they were a little confused, and I had to apologize for sending that bogus alert that actually went into the system, which was not my intent. So this is in their hands now. The incident response team will thoroughly own this incident. They'll take the web server offline. They'll contact the system owners. They will block APT Bob's new IP address. They'll perform a root cause analysis. They'll see that there was credential reuse, that there was exposure of credentials. They're probably going to be bringing up PHP myadmin. There are plenty of issues with this site, with this server that was created to be intentionally vulnerable, and that's pretty much our simulation.